Hello, everybody. This is Sarah Collado of Architecture Talk Tank. Today, we're back to speak about sales in architecture, a topic that certainly is considered a dirty topic with a dirty word of a sales. But also, I haven't really, even though we're com- fully kind of focused on business of architecture and entrepreneurship, we haven't had many experts come and speak about it. So, this episode is super close to my heart, and I'm very excited for it. Let's deep dive. Today, my guest is Mark Wainwright from England. Mark, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, perhaps let's start with a quick introduction about yourself. You do sales and architecture, which is really fascinating. So, tell me how it all came about.
I first experienced the world of architecture over 20 years ago. I was drawn to the industry. I'm not a practicing architect. I don't have any history in the education, but I was drawn because of the creativity of architecture and architects and the permanence of their work. And so I worked for architecture firms for about 8 years or so. I worked in management consulting outside of the architecture and engineering world for some years after that. And for the last 5 or 6 years or so, I have been working with architects and engineers and other experts on sales. And I bill myself as a part-time sales manager for part-time reluctant salespeople like architects and engineers and others. And I know, like you mentioned, the word sales, strikes fear in the hearts of many. But I think there's a lot to be learned, and I think it's one of those. One of those sales is one of those things where you don't know what you don't know, and there's a world of wonderful information out there that can really benefit the practice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me particularly, it's definitely been a very emotionally charged word and
Mm.
experience to sell whenever. And I think that being educated as an architect, when I came out of school, I started with humanitarian architecture, which basically meant that instead of looking for projects or clients, you look for sponsorships.
Mm.
And yeah, it was certainly a challenging process to communicate your mission and everything. But I guess that it's easier to talk about passion and still ignite that passion in others, and the money can follow. But then, as the sort of experience progressed, there was more and more people interested in private projects, and that was the moment when I started to feel extremely uncomfortable. And there was all these different emotions like sweaty palms, I couldn't put my words together, dry
Right.
mouth, and like, what on earth gives you that sort of extreme feeling when you come to a sales pitch or a sales conversation, but that particular thing. And so certainly there was a lot of fear at the beginning of my career around it, and I can completely understand that this can be a similar reaction, like architects can have similar reaction simply because we are actually not learning anything about sales or how to sell ourselves or how to communicate or even about the pricing to put on our services at
Mm.
school. So therefore we don't
Right.
have any basis to be able to excel in that topic.
Right. It's a very good point about the sweaty palms and being uncomfortable, and many experience that. And one of the goals that I have with the firms and the individuals I work with is just to get people more comfortable and confident when it comes time to have important conversations about potential new work. Many people can
Mhm.
be uncomfortable with those conversations, and really getting better at sales for me, what that looks like with individuals is just they have a higher level of comfort and confidence. They approach it with better planning and better preparation, and they kind of understand how sales works from one conversation to the next conversation to the next conversation. So, yeah, the comfort and confidence is a huge thing.
Absolutely, I agree with you. And I actually wanted to dig into it a bit deeper because I know what changed it for me personally to become more confident with sales. But I wanted to ask you, what's the important ingredient that enables us to shift from that fear into confidence?
Most individuals that are in architecture, in engineering, because I work with civil engineers and other landscape architects, all different types of individuals in professional services. One of the realities is that they are individuals who are mostly sort of left brained, right? They're more technical in their thinking. So what helps them gain confidence is structure, is organization, and sales. A lot of times, is considered the opposite of that. Sales is ambiguous and fuzzy, and the conversations are people are in the fog all the time with sales. They don't really know what the next step is. They're not really clear. I don't know, is that client going to work with us or not? We don't really know. So having some clear processes related to sales helps clear the fog, helps bring more structure to where people who are more technically minded can just understand it. So I think having structure is critical in the whole world of sales, and most just think it's sales is left to the schmoozers, the people who are networkers, and can walk into a room and close the deal, right? I think that's a lot of what the perceptions are.
Absolutely. I love how you answered that question. It's curious what you will say. But for me personally, and I think it speaks a little bit to that left side brain thing. I'm very logical. And so for me, what it shifted it was actually understanding what sales is and how you do it properly, and being able to distinguish the difference between prospecting, a sales cycle, and then really like the actual sales pitch, objections. There's so many different elements to it. And I think that actually being able to fully understand the full process, it helps break it down and see, oh, this part of the deal where I'm having the ambiguous conversation is maybe actually about getting to know each other. So I
Mm,
shouldn't be attacking yet with the deal and trying to land it. It's
right.
more about developing a relationship. And so there in sales, there are all these different phases. And I think all of them are equally important. And so being able to understand it better, you start actually relaxing into it more. And I found that to be true as well when I started to skydive, which was like so much information to take on and a very high cortisol level activity. I didn't have any trust, neither in what I've learned at the beginning. Like people gave me a bunch of information and just kind of went in, and I wasn't sure if I can use it coherently because it was just info. It didn't sink in. And then the second thing is like, do I have trust in my equipment? And so is it like, did the information sink in and do I trust, right? And so those things, I think they really kind of translate into that process of like, you know, I really believe the secret ingredient is just learn more about it,
Mm.
honestly. And then the emotional discomfort can dissolve because you just simply know each phase, what you should do. And in fact, you can also learn exactly what to answer to uncomfortable questions. That's called like objections, right? And every single salesman has a list of potentially what a person will say. Like if I try to sell
Mm.
you this iPhone, it's like, oh, it's too big for me. Would you answer to that? Or, I don't like the fact that it has one button, or maybe it's too bright. So that's an objection, and you should know what to answer. And
Mm.
it's like, I didn't realize that that can be broken down to such simplicity, and I can just prepare better for these type of conversations. And so that knowledge aspect and the trust in the process really resolved the discomfort for me.
Good point. One of the biggest challenges that people in professional services have, particularly architects, is they're not able to practice all of this enough sales. They're not able to practice sales enough. We think, oh, we have a lot of opportunities, we do a lot of jobs, but your typical salesperson is doing 10x or 100x the number of interactions and conversations throughout a sales process that a doer seller is, that an architect or an engineer is. So they just don't get the ability to practice enough in order to get better. And you're absolutely right. The learning part is bringing structure to an often confusing process, and creating, well, what step did we just do? We've completed that. Now we move on to the next step. What happens in this step? What should I be doing? What activities should I be undertaking in this step? And then if we're successful here, what's our next step together? And walking through the process together is really, really fulfilling. I think buying and selling has gotten harder and harder and harder. Buying professional services is difficult. And I think a lot of professionals lose track of that, oh, actually someone coming to us and buying our services, it's fairly confusing. It's expensive. There's a lot to it. There's different consultants involved. It takes a long time. So actually buying services from an architect or an engineer or someone else is very hard. And we have to make that process easy, for people who've never done it before. Because it's entirely possible that people who are trying to buy services from an architect or some professional services firm, it's entirely possible they've never done it before. So we
Yeah.
have to teach them how to move through this whole process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so interesting. So you're talking about process. I wanted to put like a little bit more clarity and attention on what that process actually is. Where does the sale really begin?
And I think a lot of people get a little bit confused with the terminology with sales and marketing, and there's this other term called business development. I think a lot of people are more comfortable using the term business development, and it's maybe a little bit of sales and maybe a little bit of marketing. And we could talk this entire podcast on definitions and trying to figure out what those terms are. But for me, one of the things that signals that you've moved from a marketing situation, a marketing conversation to a sales conversation is that typically marketing conversations are one to many, and they're more sort of broadcasting in nature, right? Sales conversations, you're moving more towards one-to-one interactions where they're two-way interactions, and they're more intimate. And you move from a place with marketing where you're broadcasting information, and a sales conversation is where you're based in inquiry, where you start asking more questions to uncover more information. That to me is the clear sign of when you've moved from marketing to sales. And when you first move into the sales conversations, which is how I like to refer to the sales process, the very first thing you have to figure out with a potential client is, are we going to be a good fit? Can we work well together? So I think that's the first conversation. And that typically has less to do with the potential project or the work to be done, and much more with, do we look at the world the same way? Do we believe the same things? Are we of like mind? Can we work together for a long period of time? Those things need to come first in that early conversation, rather than, well, tell me the details. What's the scope, schedule, budget? How big, how tall, how fast? That sort of thing. So that I think is when it's very clearly moving from what it was previously, a marketing conversation or whatever else, to a sales conversation.
Mm-hmm. And I'm literally burning to deep dive into this, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about prospecting alone, because that's sort of like an intentional way to get leads and engage one-on-one with people right before that conversation happens, where you're broadcasting one to many. And there is an element of measure that comes into it, that you can actually quantify your efforts and see whether they're working for you and how effective they are. And I think that that's often overlooked, is that sort of action you take to prospect. So what is prospecting?
Prospecting is proactive outbound outreach by doer sellers, by individual practitioners. Your marketing team is doing their job to hopefully generate attention and awareness and potentially leads for your organization through your website, through social media, et cetera. But you as an individual practitioner can undertake specific, very, very targeted activities to potential clients through direct communications, through emails, through telephone calls, through other ways to communicate. And the best prospecting is done, in a very rigorous, a very organized way. You don't prospect to 1,000 people; you prospect to 10 at a time, and you're trying to, the goal of prospecting is to have a conversation. It's not to close a deal All prospecting is trying to do is to ignite some interest in someone and to have a conversation. And hopefully after that conversation, which is our qualification conversation, we can move into the sales process. So prospecting is how individuals get opportunities into your sales pipeline, and it's very, very targeted and it's very specific.
And I love that you said those things, because I think that, as I mentioned before, it's overlooked so often. We think that all we have to do is content creation, look after our Instagram, send our newsletter, and then whenever there is a referral or someone from the blue sky falls onto our lap and says, "Hey, I'm interested in a conversation," that's the sale where it begins. But actually, just as we're talking, you can put targeted actions specifically to engage in conversations. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about types of actions that we can take. You mentioned that they're very well targeted. It's, it can be an email, it can be a phone call, it has a certain outcome. But what else is a good practice for an architecture firm in respect of engaging in that conversation, getting that goal ticked?
Well, one of the there's a bunch of different ways you can prospect. One of the lead generation techniques I put under the big umbrella of prospecting is asking for referrals, and I like to be super specific around the whole idea of referrals, because I know that you can find there's a lot of information out there, and there's a lot of different ways that you can receive professional introductions and referrals. But I think the best way is to be super intentional about it. You're very, very targeted the way you do it. You do it proactively, meaning that, you don't send out a blanket email to all of your contacts and say, "Hey, if you know anybody, an introduction would be great." That's
Yeah.
not, I don't think that you're going to get the results you want from something that's as diffuse and not targeted as that. When I ask for referrals, I approach specific individuals, and ask them permission. I say, "Look, would you be willing to have a referral conversation with me?" And this is a conversation about potential people that you could introduce me to. And I'm very deliberate about it. And hopefully they say, people are generally agreeable, so they say, "Sure, sure." So I have very intentional, very specific conversations with individuals about professional introductions, and most of the time they yield a really great conversation. In that referral conversation, it's really important to give them a great idea of the types of individuals or organizations that you work best with. You can relay to them a story of success that you had with a similar client, so you can help them refine the type of people that they can introduce you to. And other parts of the conversation are, look, if you're going to have a hard time introducing me to someone, I can email is the best way to do that. And you just put me on the CC line, and I can even give you just a little bit of email text that you can use when you introduce me, because a lot of times people get stuck there and they don't know how to introduce you or how to create that connection. So I like to be super intentional about referrals. And I think the what you get out of asking for referrals is exactly what you put into it. So I put a lot into it, so I get good results.
Mm-hmm. I love that. That's an excellent advice. And of course, referrals is the number one thing we rely on as architects. But if you wanted to diversify your outreach and bring clients through new means of new approaches to prospecting, what would be like your second or third go-to?
Yeah, it's I think the most effective prospecting is done with a sequence, and I think that's one of the keys. And when I talk to individuals and organizations about prospecting, I think what comes to mind is that, okay, great, I'm going to get a list of 10 people. I'm going to send out an email, and if they get back to me, great. If they don't, then we'll move on. Prospecting is best done in a sequence, meaning that it has multiple parts, it has multiple touches. It typically should happen over a fairly condensed period of time, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks or so. And you should be using different channels, but very, very similar messages. So
Mm-hmm.
what that all looks like is you should set up a number of steps that include, maybe there's an email, maybe there's some interaction on social media, maybe there's a phone call, maybe there's a in-person event that you're going to attend where you're going to see that person. You could string all those events together. There's a touch here on social media, there's a couple emails, there's a phone call, whatever it is, and that's a sequence, but you pull a common thread through the entire sequence so that people have recognition when your email shows up in their inbox or when they hear your voicemail or whatever it is, and you're talking about a similar thing and hopefully a topic that resonates with them. And then hopefully that yields someone who is very interested to talk to you, or at least curious enough to have a conversation. So I think for prospecting, what's most important is most people shy away from these sequences where they're doing multiple activities, multiple touches in a fairly condensed period of time with a kind of valuable content thread that strings through all of these touches. So that's one of the important techniques with prospecting that most aren't aware of and most avoid.
Absolutely. I love that you said that. And I think it's super true. Like, it's extremely important to connect through different channels. And there is a certain type of persistence that you need to apply into your action. It cannot be
professional persistence, right?
Exactly, not following through. And in fact, a person that is being approached, like, I feel they kind of require sometimes that persistence because, for example, I might get one email, I'll open it maybe in my break of a lunch break. And the moment I open that email, it no longer is bolted. So that means that I may or may not come back to it. And so I think that very often it happens that people get that email maybe in the wrong time of a day. Maybe they've not really had the time to respond straight away on the spot. And just because it then disappears in your inbox, it disappeared, but it's somewhere registered. And so don't be afraid to send another one or to connect on LinkedIn within a week and say, hi, I recently sent you an email. I thought I'll also say hello here. And actually, of course, have a professionally looking LinkedIn profile, but that's essentially what I do. And I wanted to talk to you also about time because, for each company, it's slightly different. Sometimes you have a sort of sales going on all the time. You have a sales department and all they do and their role is to basically constantly prospect, make sure that, they follow on leads, have these conversations, all that stuff. But if you are a smaller practice and you don't have a delegated person for it, how often should you do it? Should you have something in a pipeline that is running 24/7 for you? Or should you be doing this once a year? And then when? How is it? How seriously should you take it? And how should you organize your time around it so that it's solid, professional?
Well, you said how serious should you take it? I would say very, because it's the lifeblood of your business, and having visibility on the future revenue, future projects, etc. Is critical. It lets you bring the proper resources that you need in order to deliver that future work. And what we're talking about here is the pipeline, right? It's all your future potential work, right? If you spend enough time on your pipeline, you're able to resource the future. You're able to plan for the revenue or the growth that your firm wants to achieve. All too often, we fall back in the pattern where we're trying to resource work that we've already got under contract, and we're just worried about how we're going to bill that work, and we get into kind of a day-to-day thing. Having and maintaining a really full, rich sales pipeline lets you look out into the future, right? And there's so much power in that, because when you're looking into the future, you can start to take control and really determine where you're headed, the types of future work that you'll have in your firm, the types of future projects you'll be working on, the types of individuals that you'll need, the types of expertise you'll need in your firm. So that's really important, and that's really the why behind the having and maintaining a sales pipeline. But the as far as timing, is how much time should you spend, what type of effort should you invest? The industry suffers from this feast or famine, ebbs and flows in dramatic ways, where firms grow and then they have to shrink down relative to economic conditions or downturns or whatever it is. And I believe that just a little bit of time every day, maybe every week, spent on, making sure your pipeline opportunities are up to date, making sure that you're making the right calls and communications with opportunities that are in your pipeline, or even from a prospecting standpoint, trying to get new opportunities in your pipeline. Just a little bit of work all the time is way better than this ebbs and flows, ups and downs. So, most folks will spend a huge amount of time on particular efforts. Some you win, some you don't. They get frustrated, and then they go back to delivering their work, doing the architecture, doing the engineering, whatever it is. But a more effective way to do all of this is just a little bit of time, and that sounds easy. It's easier to say than it is to do, because we get really focused on our craft, but it's critical. And what that does is, if you do it a little bit at a time, just like anything else, it builds the habits and builds the muscle memory that we all need to do this. And I do it all the time, for my business, and that just gives me the consistency, and the practice to kind of keep it going. So yeah, it's absolutely a little bit at a time.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I just wanted to add to it that it's super important. I think that that's what really allowed me to have a bit of a shift in my mentality about it, is that sales and prospecting and anything that comes to brings a result of us being able to actually land a client, it's a numbers game. And so it's a little bit like in life, you'll probably go on 100 dates. Out of 10, out of that 10 are going to be actually memorable. Out of that, maybe you will connect with 2 people who will be your like long-term boyfriends, and maybe 1 will be, it's basically, and think about it, it's building relationships, and certainly those numbers matter. So I think that it's really important to actually understand that the more people you're actually reaching out to intentionally, not again, we're not talking about followers on social media. We're not talking about how many people you're broadcasting to, but actually people you're engaging in conversation with. How many of those will actually be interested to perhaps know you more, like to date a little bit, right? To know you more, and then maybe develop into a more serious relationship, and then get married, and then that marriage would be the sale. So I think it's important to kind of look at it that way. And if you understand it's a numbers game, are you currently reaching out to people enough, having maybe less frequently, but enough conversations to them, so that convert into something more meaningful. And so I think it's really approaching that in that manner, and not taking it personally if someone says I'm not interested, or why did you spam me with this email, or whatever. Or it's a numbers game. Some people will think that's not attractive to them, and another person will actually follow through. So seeing it that way really helps. And I think that certainly nowadays with technology, there's a lot of automation within the digital space, online, available to you to actually create this prospecting for yourself. So one of the examples is there are outreach tools on LinkedIn you can buy into. It's a software, and you basically set up an audience with that software of targeted people, maybe with a certain demographic in your area, with a certain income, and maybe living in the real estate area or whatever, looking for renovations, right? So who your client is, who you want to speak to, and you can target them and only connect with that group of people through LinkedIn by having the tool send an automated friendship request. So you don't actually have to take any time out of your day to do that. You just can operate the tool and monitor it, and that's it. And really, of course, in order to explain how that works, we would have to dig deeper. But what I'm trying to say is that it doesn't have to be label heavy. You don't have to hire a person to do that for you. Sit there all day writing messages to 50 people in your area, the same message or a similar message, or there is tools that can help you with that. And so that's good to know.
There are agreed. And when I coach individuals and organizations about prospecting, I typically recommend that they use one tool, one outreach channel, and one time block at a time. Meaning that, if you have a sequence that includes various channels, like you said, LinkedIn, it could be telephone calls, it could be text messages, it could be emails, whatever else. Sit down with your 30 minutes of time on Thursday, and just send emails, right? Just do that, right? So you can move through those very quickly. It is much easier to do that rather than, trying to connect with 3 people on LinkedIn and then making 2 phone calls and sending a text message and three emails. Like 4 hours later, you're going to think, I can't do this all the time. This is way too much time. So bringing more structure and organization to the act of prospecting and being very organized about the type of tool you're using and being very consistent in a single time block about that is really, really important. It sounds, really, really specific and really tactical, but it really helps. If you're going to sit down and you say, all right, I have to make 5 phone calls, right? So you're going to sit down at your one time block and that's all you're going to do. There's going to be no, LinkedIn activity, no text message, nothing. It's just make your phone calls and then be done with it. And that's the way you can be really, really efficient with prospecting.
So useful. I wanted to talk a little bit about the softer side of sale. So in that moment when we actually have a conversation, you touched upon it a little bit. You talked slightly about pain points, about your understanding of your customer. I think empathy is really a good sort of word to throw into the mix. You know what I want to talk about? I'll let you speak.
Oh, are we talking about creating an important statement of understanding, or are you?
Yeah, and also just how to manage that conversation. What is important from a soft skill perspective to learn about a really good communication strategy with your client?
Yeah. We can talk about curiosity, right? That's the most important word out there.
So, which allows you to listen, right?
It does. And as experts, and I fall into this category as well. If you are an expert, over time, your expertise starts to cloud your curiosity, right? And suddenly you become the person who has to have all the answers, right? You need to be the smartest person in the room. And what that prevents is what you just said there, is that ability to gain a deep understanding and to gain, to establish, empathy with the people that you're working with. And curiosity is one of a strong sense of curiosity is one of the most powerful tools that anyone that sells anything can have, because a deep sense of curiosity yields a very clear understanding of the problems, the desires, the needs that they have, what, their hopes and dreams, everything that you're trying to solve, with the work that you can provide. So yeah, curiosity is absolutely critical. And one thing people don't really connect is that their expertise is actually fighting against their ability to be truly curious. So yeah, I ask all my wonderfully intelligent people that I work with all the time, who are absolute experts in their fields, to just take their expertise and put it aside for a minute and just really be really be curious.
Yeah, actually, even, preparing for those calls by sitting down and sketching a bunch of questions and telling yourself, my rule is I'll ask questions and I won't speak, at least for the half of the conversation, so that I can really show that first and foremost, I'm interested and I want to gather information. I think it's extremely important to, even for like positioning yourself as an expert, to being able to take that step back and be able to listen, because the person that feels listened to feels like you will understand them better. That's just, it comes in pair, and you already will have that established just by being able to take that step back and not trying to outsmart the person straight away, right?
Right. There's this interesting thing that happens with really wonderful questions. We have, in a conversation, we have the option of being explicit about our expertise and talking about ourselves, and it feels a little bit sometimes like convincing. But the other option we have is to just be really curious and ask a lot of questions. And through our questions, we actually infer our expertise rather than the need to be explicit about it. And that's actually a more powerful tool, because it not only gets people to kind of understand that we know what we're talking about, but it gets them to reflect and really understand themselves more as we ask them really wonderful questions. And coming up with really good questions is actually harder than talking about ourselves in a conversation, which is why it happens so infrequently, right?
Yeah.
People fail to ask good questions because it's just hard. It's just more difficult to ask good questions than it is to talk about ourselves. And when we're in situations where our palms are sweaty and we're uncomfortable, we default back to what we know, and what we know is ourselves. So we end up talking about ourselves.
Yeah, and blabbing away, over talking the other person, which as a result, they will come out of this conversation overwhelmed by information, but also at the same time have a feeling like they haven't explained to you enough of what their need is, what their fear is, what they're worried about. Maybe it's the money, time, maybe, I don't know, whatever the issue is they might be facing with
Yeah.
what they have to accomplish with the build. They haven't had a chance to tell you about it. And that is very worrisome for a person that is now looking to hire an architect and knows that they're going to enter that process of having to have a lot of those discussions, right?
Right.
So I think being able to portray yourself as a person that's able to listen will give that build a level of trust and comfort as well. And that's what you want to do. But the moment we start talking about this, we're talking about using soft skills to ease the conversation. You talking about respectful communication, talking about empathy. Sometimes people can start seeing some level of manipulation, and I think that it's not uncommon to think of sales as manipulation. And I think the less we know about it, the more we associate it with like some type of mind game. So what do you say to that?
It's a good point. And I think one of the things, and this may sound like a really kind of obvious answer, is just people just need to be their authentic selves. And if they feel awkward in a conversation, or they're going to ask a question that they feel is a bit forward, your body language, the questions you ask, the way you present yourself, if you can do it kind of very genuinely and authentically, I think that kind of diffuses and mitigates any of that sort of trickery in the sales process. I am in any conversation always just trying to put myself forward as like, look, I don't know anything about you and your organization. I'm just super curious. I just have some questions for you. I'm really interested. I learned a little bit about you and your organization, but I just want to know more, and like saying that, it just there's an authenticity to it that I think people really, really appreciate. We don't have to be anything else other than ourselves. When we're in important sales conversations, you can mess things up, you can say the wrong thing, but there's also there's always opportunities to just qualify anything you say and say, look, I don't know the answer to this, which is really why I'm asking the question. I want to know more about your past, or I just want to know why you're doing this right now. Why this particular, why this change to your house, or why this new building is really important to your organization. Just, can you tell me why? And I think if you bring that level of humility and just humanity to a conversation, you can steer clear of that sort of salesy sort of a posture.
Yeah, absolutely. What a wonderful conversation, Mark. Thank you so much for joining me today. If people wanted to reach you, where do they go? Where do they find you online?
Absolutely, and thank you so much for having me, Sarah. It's been a pleasure to speak with you. My website is wainwrightinsight.com, and I also spend a good bit of time on LinkedIn. People are welcome to follow or connect with me there. I'm happy to have conversations with any wonderful professional out there who just needs a little more comfort and confidence when it comes to sales. So
Wonderful.
Really great to talk with you.
Thank you so much. And thanks for everyone who listened in. Take care, guys.
Bye.